Happy Tuesday, sports fans. We're here at the Trogcast number 4, trying to get into even deeper to the NCAA men's season. I got there's two really old guys here, Jeff Zink and Jim Reaker on the line. How you doing today, Jim?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. A little bit under the weather, but, you know, it is that time of day, and it's that kind of day, a rainy, wet, cold December afternoon.
Yep, little gloomy like it probably is down in Lexington, and remind folks you heard it first. Jim Reaker, the great prognosticator, Jimmy the Reek, called it here on this program last week. Number 11, UCLA, went to Lexington and put a little thumping on the Wildcats. Did you get a chance to watch that game or see any of the after effects, Jim?
I didn't get a chance to watch it, but I reviewed some of the press clippings from it, and the way it sounds that UCLA just came out and took control of the game and pretty much kept their distance from the Wildcats, didn't let them get back into the game the entire time. It was kind of interesting. I was reading. Coach Cal said that they didn't have a shoot-around that morning because it was a noon tip, and that was the reason they didn't play as well as they should. He in fact said he called a timeout with a minute into the game because he just realized his team didn't have any energy. But I think that probably is attributed to the time of year it is. We talked about, you know, it's for college students, it's exam week for a lot of them, and we've talked about it before. These basketball players are students too, whether you believe it or not.
Yeah, well, the pollster certainly took a notice. They moved UCLA up to actually number 2 in the country and moved Kentucky down to number 6. I mean, like you said on our Razorcast last week, not many visitors come into Lexington and take a win. So UCLA, who people seem to be a little hesitant about at the beginning of the year, wondering if Steve Alford could jump back now, or on the Bruins bandwagon.
Yeah, just to note that the Wildcats had a 42-game win streak at Rupp Arena that was broken by UCLA. Of course, when we talk about UCLA, we all remember that streak that was broken back in the 1970s when they won 88 games in a row overall on the road and at home. That was one of the that'll never happen again. But, yeah, I think you weren't very high on UCLA. I know the Pac-12 is one of your conferences you're following at the beginning. You weren't very high on them. But if you look, I think last year was kind of an aberration for Steve Alford. And he's got a lot of talent out there. Again, a couple of my friends who were texting back and forth about the game while they were watching it were impressed and said they were a high-scoring team and actually a fun team to watch.
Well, I think the proof will be in the pudding for Steve Alford this season. He had down here last year and made a nice gesture of returning his contract extension for a year, which told him that's how he felt as well. And we'll see now. Now that leads us to the next question, which is we're in our the 5th week of rankings, and we're already on our 3rd number 1. So now defending champion Villanova is up on top. How long can they hold on to that spot?
Well, we talked about undefeateds now. I think we're going to talk about that somewhat today. And I look for Villanova, looking at their schedule. They do have a test with Notre Dame coming up, but I think they'll get by that. And I think Villanova will remain undefeated somewhere into the Big East schedule, although the schedulers put Creighton and Butler on their schedule within the first week, so that'll be a real challenge. Both those teams are having a good year. But I look for the Wildcats to maybe finish out the year number 1, and it'll be interesting to see how long it goes till we still have an undefeated team.
Finish off the year number 1, another bold prediction there from Jim Reaker.
Now, let me qualify the calendar year. I'm talking about the calendar year.
Calendar year, okay, not the season.
Yeah. No, I don't think we'll have. You know, here's a question for you: will we have another undefeated national champion? I don't think so.
Not the way things are right now. I think that's a myth, and we're going to talk about undefeated a little bit later in the show. So we'll save some of that for right now. I definitely don't think we'll have an undefeated unless we get some sort of super team in the future. We came close with Kentucky a couple of years ago, but I just don't see it happening. Another thing we talked about last week and set up was something that's always fun, and that's the ACC Big Ten Challenge. So I will take you up on my hot fudge sundae or cold beverage because we just slipped past you there in the ACC. Some interesting games. It did end up with the ACC winning 9-5, but going into the last night, which was Wednesday, November 30th, it was tied 4-4. And that last day, 3 of the games were decided by just one score. So it really could have gone either way. If you get a chance to check out some of those games, and what are some of your thoughts about the ACC and the Big Ten Challenge?
Well, the Big Ten came through, and I think the Big Ten is going to be a conference to be reckoned with all through the season, just like their football. They're considered the top football league in the nation right now, and I think basketball is going to be up there at least in the top 3 or 4. Interesting enough, I was watching and keeping score because of our bet, and those 3 games were all finishing at about the same time. That was Clemson and Nebraska, Virginia, Ohio State, and Virginia Tech and Michigan. I was flipping around watching all of those endings because they were all very, very close back and forth. And unfortunately for me and my betting, the ACC won all 3 of those games and won the overall series by a commanding 9-5 total. But again, if those 3 games would have swung the other way, the Big Ten would have won it 8-6. So it was a good series, I think, for both conferences. Both of them are going to bode well, but they'll be right there at the top when we get to March.
Yeah, I think we're looking at, from my point of view, the 2 strongest conferences overall, top to bottom. I read an article earlier this week that's kind of putting the Big 12 there, but they don't have as many teams in the Big 12 for basketball. I think they really only have 10 teams in the Big 12 for that. But when you look at these teams, you got Wisconsin, now Notre Dame, Duke, Louisville, Purdue, Indiana, North Carolina, and Virginia, all in the top 25 who are playing in that, along with tough teams like Ohio State and Michigan State. Just top to bottom, it shows that there's going to be a lot of basketball left to play, and it'll be interesting to see what happens come tournament time.
Yeah, exactly. And, we kind of haven't talked about Michigan State because of their tough start to the season. Of course, we have talked about the schedule that Coach Izzo gave the Spartans for this year, a very big challenge. But you and I know that come March, probably the Spartans will be a force to be reckoned with. He has some young players that he has to mold and bring them along.
Oh, there's no doubt that Izzo's going to have Sparty there when it comes time at the end, and I think they'll even be back in the top 25 easily. As we talked about last week, Coach Izzo apologized to his team about how tough the schedule is, but it'll pay off down the road. There's no doubt about it. Well, last week we talked about a lot of top 25 matchups that had mixed results. But what happened is we're coming down on the end of the undefeateds. Now, to put it in perspective, about this weekend last year, there were only 4 undefeateds left in the NCAA men's, and we're talking about 350 teams. Last week we saw Kentucky lose for the first time. North Carolina lost to Indiana, who's jumped back up in the rankings. We talked about that Virginia and West Virginia matchup with Bobby Huggins' boys took away from Tony Bennett. Xavier lost to Baylor on the road. Purdue dropped its first, but it was to number 14 Louisville. So we've only got 12 undefeated teams left out of the 350-plus, but 9 of them are in the top 25. So it was a great week for matchups, teams in the top 25. We don't have as many this week. Cincinnati's moved up into the top 25, and they do play Butler later this week. And, of course, you mentioned the Villanova and Notre Dame game, which is coming up in just a couple of days. But that leads us to just have a little fun with this. Who do you think is going to? You just said that you thought Nova would last into the next year, but who do you think is going to be able to stay undefeated the longest?
Again, I would go with my 2 picks would be Nova and I think Gonzaga. I think Gonzaga and St. Mary's, who are in the same league out there, the West Coast Conference, Both will be undefeated, and I think they play somewhere around like January 12th. So I think that'll be a big game for the conference. They're going to get a lot of national recognition. Probably by that time there'll only be 4 or 5 undefeated teams left, and there'll be 2 of them in the conference. And actually, both of them are ranked in the top 10, which is a great accolade for the West Coast Conference to have 2 teams in the national top 10 at this point of the year. So I think that'll be a big game. I've seen Gonzaga play a little bit. I haven't seen St. Mary's, but I think they're a very, very good team. So my 2 choices would be Gonzaga and Villanova to be the last 2 remaining as the undefeated.
Well, I think, any team you go with is going to be a nice choice. And you certainly, the thing I would have against Nova is, in their next 7 games between now and that first weekend of the new year. I mean, you said you sort of cut it off at December 31st. They've got to play 3 teams in the top 10, and they've got to go back-to-back away. It's Creighton and Butler. And I just think, sometime in there Nova might fall. They'll be back. And Gonzaga, I'm with you. It's whoever, I'll take St. Mary's just to say the opposite of Gonzaga, but whoever has that game that's on January 14th where they play each other, I think it's the one that's going to end up lasting the longest. Another team to look at, though, is the big surprise this year, which has been the Baylor Bears. I mean, they didn't get any love in the first rankings at all, not one vote, and now they're number 4 in the country after beating a slew of tough teams, including, the team that was ranked just a little ahead of them last week in Xavier that we already talked about. But they don't really have anybody on their schedule until Iowa State on January 5th. Of course, they're going to get into Big 12 action then. There's no holds barred when it comes to conference time. So I think the Baylor Bears are going to be able to continue to run. Everybody else has got too many tough teams on their schedule. UCLA could outlast it because they've only got Oregon away, but again, the same thing when you get to the Pac-12. Still, too easy to beat up on each other.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. In fact, some people have said that maybe Baylor should be the number 1 team in the country because they have the most top wins on their resume. But if you look at that a little bit closer, they have not played a true road game yet. They had the big win over Oregon, but that was in Waco. They had the big win Saturday, of course, on Xavier, but that was in Waco. And their other big wins were down in the Atlantis tournament, which were neutral sites. And so I think for that reason, I think they're where they should be. But, yeah, when most of these teams, that's why if you really look for a team to maybe go undefeated for the entire season, I'd probably look at Gonzaga or St. Mary's, although they got to play each other twice. They'll probably end up splitting those. But the other teams in the top Power 5 conferences or Power 6, I guess, when you talk about basketball, it's just too brutal anymore with the way these conferences are set up and the quality of teams all the way through them. There's just no way I think you can go through one of those top 6 conferences undefeated. If you do, you're going to have a very good team come March.
Well, the nice thing is there are just a lot of good teams, and as we've talked a couple times before, that the rankings are going to shuffle like a boggle game until things settle down closer to March Madness, and you can see who it is. So I mentioned a team like Baylor that got no love. Suddenly they're number 4, or not suddenly, it's been 4 weeks now, and you got UCLA who started low in the pack is up to number 2. So there's still going to be a lot of shuffling going on, but it is going to be interesting to see because coming into their conference play, which for most schools begins that last week of December, there's a lot of playing against each other. Another reason that I mentioned Baylor is that they basically have no games this week. It must be their exam week because they'll be able to be rested up, and then they go through teams like Southern, Jackson State, John Brown, Texas Southern before they have to travel to Oklahoma and then host Iowa State. So going to be a lot of great basketball here in December, and we'll be looking forward to talking about it here on the Trogcast. Anything else from you, Jim?
Well, a couple things. Number one, fans, if you want to see the Fort Wayne Mastodons, they are playing at Notre Dame this evening, and that game is on ESPN2. I'm not so sure, again, if they would not have defeated Indiana earlier, I might be picking them, and I will be cheering for the Mastodons. You know, they are the team of the year. I told you that back on, November 10th? But the Irish obviously are not going to be surprised by them, and that game is actually played on the Notre Dame campus, so about a 2-hour bus ride from Fort Wayne to South Bend. So that it could be tough, but I'll be cheering for them. I'm not feeling that maybe they could pull that off, but again, they're 7-2 right now. They're on like a 5-game winning streak, which the second game of that streak, of course, was that big upset of IU in Fort Wayne. So. And also, we probably want to make mention that this is, if you've watched any college basketball this week, this is Jimmy V week, and mention all the great things they do for the research and cures for the different cancers out there that he started a long time ago. In fact, one of my favorite 30 for 30 on ESPN is one called Survive and Advance. If you have not seen that, is the great story about Jimmy Valvano and the 1984 North Carolina State Wolfpack and how they managed to win that national championship against all odds, all the things they had to overcome with injuries and games that looked like they were going to lose in the NCAA tournament and somehow miraculously won, including that last game, which nobody gave them a chance against the undefeated Houston Cougars, which was Phi Slamma Jamma. And if you don't know what that is, look that up, kids. One of the greatest slamming basketball teams of all time.
And another good 30 for 30. Yeah.
You ready for your trivia for the week?
Well, I just wanted to say, you never know that Notre Dame has to play Villanova on the 10th, so maybe they're going to catch Notre Dame in a trap game, and you'll have 2 great wins on your resume there as you go through. But, like Jimmy B said, don't give up. Don't ever give up. In fact, tonight at the Garden, Madison Square Garden in New York, is actually the Jimmy B doubleheader, and that's Arizona State against Purdue and Duke against Florida. In fact, I read a story this morning where Bobby Hurley will be coaching the Arizona State Sun Devils, and in the presence of his former coach, Coach K, he said that he does not ever plan to schedule Duke while he is a basketball coach, and the only way he will ever play them is if he has to in the NCAA tournament. Hey, I think there's a lot of schools around the country would like to stay away from Coach K and Duke, especially as his freshmen come together. They're going to be a force to be reckoned with throughout the year. So.
Yeah, and I don't know if you noticed or you watched the game. I watched a little bit of it, that 2 of those 3 freshmen that have been injured actually played in their last game against Maine, and they believe the 3rd one might be back tonight, but they're not so sure. Coach K's kind of mum on when he's bringing his injured players back, kind of using the old Coach Belichick. We'll see who shows up, or we'll play who's ready to play on that day, but not giving any help to the opposing team how to prepare for them.
And as we've often said, it is just the first week in December. It's not the first week in April, so plenty of time for them to mold into the team that Coach K wants them to be. All right, Stumpy, what have you got for me? What are you going to throw at me today?
I try to keep this kind of in the spirit of something we discussed today, and kind of one of the big topics today was undefeated teams and seasons. So I did a little research on that. There are 4 programs who have won 7 national championships undefeated. Can you name those 4 programs?
Well, the easiest one, of course, you've already mentioned, is UCLA.
You are correct. 1964, 1967, 1972, and 1973. Of course, the era where you and I were kids, when it seemed like it was UCLA and everybody else.
And I can tell you how old I was. I was watching on TV when Digger Phelps and the Irish broke their winning streak at 88. Other undefeateds. Now, you've got me on that because I don't really follow that all that much.
Well, you should know one, the last one, because it's mentioned a lot. In fact, they just had the anniversary. The team got together just last week in one of the ACC Big Ten Challenge games, if you watch that, because they mentioned it several times that this was the last team that had gone undefeated and won a national championship. help you out there?
Well, then it's got to be that. I'm going to say not sure. I don't think the Dukies ever did it, but I'll go Duke.
No. Bobby Knight and the Indiana Hoosiers in 1976.
That's right. So that's the last one that ever did it. So I figured most of them had to be older than the UCLA era.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, have to go way back. Another guess might be, I can't remember if they went undefeated or not, but the San Francisco Dons, did they go undefeated with Bill Russell in the 50s?
Bill Russell and Casey Jones took the San Francisco Dons to a 29-0 national championship in 1956. You are correct, Mr. Zink. Good job. You want to take a wild guess at the last one?
What's that?
You want to take a wild guess at the last one?
I thought you were giving me a hint there because I think the wild guess would be I can only think that the Wildcats probably did it sometime under Adolph Rupp, but that's, again, just a shot in the dark.
No, they did not. Actually, I'll give you one clue. It won't help you much, but it was in 1957, just 1 year after the Dons did it for the first time for San Francisco.
Oh, you'd be surprised. That's not that hard. That's Frank McGuire and the Tar Heels.
You are correct. Very good. I didn't think you'd get it on that clue. They went 32-0 that season. I was reading a little bit about that season this morning. He did something very unusual where he only played 8 home games that year.
Yes, traveled a lot
and got them ready for the tournament. And I believe go ahead.
Was that the? I believe they beat Kansas in overtime to finish it off. It was
pretty good. Triple overtime.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you did pretty well. I'm happy. You're improving.
I'm improving. Well, thank you. You can give me a gold star on my chart, and we'll go from there, considering that I have got to do it right off the top of my head. But, we'll take that. It's no problem. But that just goes to show you, if we haven't had one since the mid-1970s with Bobby Knight and the Hoosiers, and again, we almost had one a couple years ago. Kentucky almost pulled it off. They lost in the last game. So it's possible, but it's going to be very difficult.
Well, here's what you have to take into account. In 56, the Dons were 29-0. 57, the Tar Heels were 32-0. UCLA was 30-0, and all 4 of theirs. And Indiana was 32-0 in theirs in 1976. Most teams now, with the exempt tournaments and everything, play about 40 games. And, again, with those exempt tournaments, them playing quality opponents early on, and just, again, the way the leagues are set up now, they're just so tough, and they're kind of grinders during the early months of the new year, the winter time. I don't know if it'll ever happen again. If it does, I would be very impressed.
Well, the other thing about that, because I did a little looking at that before our first broadcast, is the season it's only about a week, maybe 7-8 days longer than it was even when Coach Wooden was winning his first couple back in the 60s. So you're putting in 10, 12, 13 more games in basically the same amount of time, and that wears down on a group of kids over time. Well, you go ahead.
Yes, it does. That's all I was going to say.
Well, we thank you again for joining the Trogcast. We'll be with you again next Tuesday. I'm going to try to regulate things and come to you every Tuesday around noon so you can see it afterwards. Wait for the weekly rankings to come out and go and see what we can talk about. Hope that you'll also join us every Thursday when we do our Razor Cast, which is Reaker and Zink on Xavier basketball. So if you're a Musketeer fan, please tune in for that.
All right. Well, we'll see you, Jeff.
All right. Take care, Mr. Reaker. Jimmy the Reek. We're looking forward to your next big prediction.
All right. We'll see you.